is getting to a place. It's taking steps to get to this place in life. It's in there allowing yourself to be stretched and allowing yourself to be molded. It's taking steps of obedience. And when you take those steps of obedience, what you find yourself is always find yourself landing in a place of provision. See, our praise comes with a price, but in saying that, the price pales in comparison to the price he paid for us. Because again, truly, worship is an element of sacrifice. It's an element of paying a price, of allowing ourselves to be stretched, allowing ourselves to be molded, allowing ourselves to be formed by God. But it is also, celebrating the amazing deal. I mean, that's what this whole story is about. It's a foreshadowing of the ultimate price that Jesus would pay for us on the cross, a price that you and I could never pay for our sin and for our shame. And so here we are. Abraham and Isaac, they're walking up and they build this altar, and Abraham sets his son there, and it says in Genesis 22:8, it says, Abraham answers, Isaac's question of, hey, where are we going to get the offering? And just imagine, talk about awkward conversation there. Abraham's like, well, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offerings, probably looking away, and the two of them, they went on together. And it goes on to say in verse 9, it says, when they reached the place God had told them about, Abraham built an altar there, arranged the wood on, and get this, he bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Now this verse, it speaks a lot to Abraham's character. As you're going to discover, it speaks a lot to God's character, and his goodness, even though you might not be able to see it in this moment. But it also speaks a lot to Isaac's character. Again, Isaac, at this point in time, Abraham was well over 100 years of age. And Isaac at this point most scholars believe was about 20-some years old. So safe to say that he could have probably taken his dad. I don't know. Maybe his dad had old man strength. I don't know what the deal is. But pretty sure if Isaac didn't want to go through with this, he didn't have to. He could have totally fought against it. He could totally push back against it. Which, by the way, again, another picture of the gospel. God, it wasn't so much that God sacrificed his son as much as it was Jesus willingly sacrificing, laying down his life for you and for me and all of our sins and all of our junk and all of our shame. And so, again, Isaac, he willingly surrenders his life in this situation. And so it goes on, verse 10, and it says, and then Abraham reaches out his hand, takes a knife just to slay son. He's getting ready to do the unthinkable. And here's where God stops him. Because again, this story was never about sacrifice. It was about obedience. See, God was never looking for Abraham's sacrifice. He was looking for his obedience. He was looking for this man who would be willing to trust the heart, the character of God's goodness. And listen, when it comes to this idea of obedience, when you think about it, nothing tests our obedience more than this area of generosity, especially when we talk about this area of like giving and giving of our treasure, as the Bible likes to say. Certainly, when we're talking to treasure, there would have been nothing more important to Abraham than his one and only son. And again, when we're talking about obedience, what we're talking about here is this tension in our lives. And when I say there's no greater test, in fact, Jesus speaks to this, Matthew 6:24 says, and no one can serve two masters, for you'll hate one and love the other. You'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. King James says mammon, and mammon actually speaks of more than just money. It speaks of treasure. It speaks of stuff. It speaks of those things that we tend to so want to hold on to. Those things we draw our identity from. Those things we draw our security from. Those things, anything and everything but God. And certainly for, Abraham, Isaac, speaking of a treasure, again, he would have represented everything for him. I mean, again, Abe, think of just Abraham's name and speak in terms of identity. Abe in Hebrew means father. Abraham literally means father of multitudes. So you can just imagine Abraham as he's getting ready to do the unthinkable. He's thinking, man, I'm about to sacrifice. I'm about to lose not just my son, but this is everything about me. I mean, how can I be a father with no kid? I'm losing everything. He's putting everything on the line. See, Isaac, you got to remember, again, and this is so much more. This actually has nothing to do with sacrificing kids or, no matter how angry you might get at your kids, this has nothing to do with that. I mean, but this has everything to do with your willingness to surrender that thing that you've been holding on to, that you've been looking at to draw that sense of security, that sense of identity, that sense of who you are from. And so for you, that might be stuff. I don't know what your Isaac is. Maybe for you it's a job, it's a career. Maybe for you it's a dream that you've just been holding on to. And this is who I am. This is what I'm about. And yet, here's the thing. Because again, you could look at this and still be like, okay, it's not about sacrifice, it's about obedience. But that still seems like a really rotten thing to ask of Abraham, God. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, it's weird. It seems heartless. But again, what was the promise initially given to Abraham? So I'm going to make you a father of multitudes. As many stars in the sky, you're going to have kids. I mean, that was the promise. See, what he was trying to get across to Abraham, and what I believe he's trying to get across to some of us tonight, is that you cannot simultaneously hold on to what you have and take hold of what God has for you. You can't have the sand of the seashore, which was one of the promises given to Abraham, that you'll have as many kids as the sands in the seashore, which, living on the coast, we know that's a lot, unless you're willing to let go of a single grain. I want to bless you, but you've got to be willing to trust me. I want to bless you, but you've got to be willing to let go of that treasure in your life that, to be honest, actually has just as much a hold on you as you've got a hold on it. And this is where it gets really tough. And this is why so many of us, I think, miss out on God's blessing, God's provision in our life, is because, again, like Abraham, I'm sure in a moment there, as he's holding on to his son, there's a moment where we can tend to hold on to, because we think letting go of that is going to be a sacrifice. We think if I let go, if I let go of this, to take that step, maybe God's whispered something in your life. He's put a dream. He's maybe speaking to some of you. Hey, look, I want you to start a ministry, or get involved in the ministry, or get involved in serving, or maybe I want you to adopt a child or a kid. I mean, it's something that might seem more than a little crazy to some others. You look at it and you're like, oh my goodness, that's a lot of work, that's a lot of struggle, and our initial reaction sometimes is man, it's just to see it as sacrifice. Like, I don't know if I'm ready to sacrifice my future, sacrifice my dreams, sacrifice my hope, sacrifice my fun. We think of obedience as always leading to sacrifice. But that's not where this story goes. See, in this story, obedience doesn't necessarily lead to sacrifice. Obedience leads to God's provision and blessing. And it's amazing how this happens, too. Because this isn't, and this is what's different, what makes obedience and sacrifice different. See, sacrifice is if I give, then I'll get back. Obedience is no. If you'll give, what happens is your eyes will be open to what you already have. See, it's amazing when you start to take that step that on the surface looks like sacrifice. On the surface looks so uncomfortable. On the surface, like, I don't have the time for that. I don't have the talent for that. I don't have the gift for that. It's amazing how when you'll step in faith, trusting in God's character, trusting in God's provision and God's blessing and God coming through for your life. It's amazing how you take that step of obedience, you realize just what you have in God. I found this, this might surprise you, but I never in my college days, I didn't think I was going to be a pastor. I didn't. A pastor was the last thing I thought of doing and wanted to do. In fact, I thought I was going to be a forest ranger, kind of like the movie Cliffhanger. Anyone see Cliffhanger? Sylvester Stallone saving the world, which was great. And I thought I was going to do that. So I checked on schools, and I thought of being a forest ranger until I went camping once and realized that I don't even like camping. I don't like being outside, so this is probably not for me. Unfortunately, I don't have Eric's skills and ability there of being an outdoorsman. But so then I went to the next best thing. I thought I'd be a psychologist. So I went to classes for that. I went to school for that, and it's been a couple years actually just pursuing that. And that's what I told everyone I was going to pursue, what I was going to be. And yet here's God coming in. In fact, last week we talked about how the Spirit, that Spirit inside you comes alive, it'll start to kind of whisper some things that your soul, the old soul, wants to kind of push against, your mind, your will, your emotions. And certainly that was the case for me. Is that old self was just, you don't want to be a pastor? Whoa, you don't want to do that? That doesn't make sense. I mean, every pastor I know, they wear these robes, which is, totally not you. You don't want to do this. And again, for me, initially when I saw it looked like sacrifice. And not just sacrifice of happiness, not just sacrifice of my dreams, not just sacrifice of my future. I also looked at it and just, I felt so inadequate for it. I was like, man, I'm a stutterer. I'm terrible putting together my words. How could I ever be a preacher, a pastor? And yet it's amazing how when I took a step of obedience, it's not that God all of a sudden, once I took that step, all of a sudden he empowered me to be like the next Billy Graham. And far from it, right? But it's amazing how when I would take a step of obedience, God's provision, this reality of him being more than enough, and the giftings and the callings and the talents he's placed in me being more than enough, I started to see that. It started to come to surface. And the same thing happens with you. When you step out to serve, it's amazing, I'm terrible with kids, which in maybe David's case, that might be true. But for a lot of people, if you take a step out there, you'll come to realize that maybe I'm not as bad at this as I thought. I got more talent and gifting at this than I thought, which actually my boy loves David as a teacher. So, But it's amazing how when you take that step of obedience, it's not necessarily, it's again, different sacrifices you get, and I'm going to somehow get something back in return. Obedience is so much more than that. Obedience is taking those steps, answering that call, no matter how crazy it might be that God's calling you to or whispering in your ear, and walking with this attitude of surrender, this attitude of humility. And as you do that, it's amazing how your eyes begin to open up to God's provision. And that's exactly what we see in the story. See, God did the miraculous, and it would have been miraculous even if he just, he calls out to Abraham and actually kind of catches Abraham before he does the unthinkable and says, hey, no, don't touch your boy. Again, this isn't about sacrifice, it's about obedience. And he goes on to say, hey, don't do anything to him. And now I know you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. Again, the provision. And it's interesting. There's a verse before that where Abraham, even when he was walking up to do this, he said, the Lord will provide, Jehovah Jireh. In fact, actually, in that Hebrew, it's actually framed more as the Lord has provided. The Lord has provided. See, you got to understand that this wasn't just a ram that just showed up on the scene all of a sudden. Like, hey, once you took that step of sacrifice, then here's the provision. Here's the gift. No, it was because you took obedience. His eyes were open to the provision that was already there. The provision that was there all along. And the same holds true for us. And that's my prayer for you, is that tonight you would answer that call. I don't know what the Isaac is in your life. the thing you've been holding on to, but in holding on to it, it's got a hold on you. And it's holding you back from the blessing that God wants to pour into your life, the provision God wants to bless you with and provide for you, the call that he's leading you to. I don't know what it is for you. But if I can tell you this, is if you'll have the courage to take a step of obedience, even when you look at it and maybe all you see right now is, oh man, that just looks like sacrifice. Me sacrificing my joy, sacrificing my future, sacrificing my hope if I take that crazy step. Listen, if you'll take that step, what you're going to come to find is your eyes, your vision's going to open up and you're going to see that God's provision and God's blessing has been there all along. And you're going to begin to see his provision come to life. See, the only thing that changed for Abraham in this whole scenario was an ability to see what was already there. The blessing of God, the provision of God. See, the first time Abraham looked up, he saw a mountain. He saw sacrifice. He saw struggle. The next time Abraham looked up, he saw a miracle. The first time he looked up, he saw pain. The second time he looked up, he saw provision. The first time Abraham looked up, he saw what obedience costs. The next time Abraham looked up, he saw what obedience creates. Obedience doesn't necessarily lead you to a place of sacrifice. It leads you to the place of God's provision. God's provision, God's blessing in your life. And so, as we kind of wrap up tonight, that's really my prayer for you. Is one to identify what is your Isaac? What is that thing you've been holding on to? And God's calling you to let go. Not to make your life miserable, not to make your life tough, not to make your life hard, but because he wants to provide and he wants to give to you something so much more than the thing you're trying to hold on to. The thing you're trying to pull identity out of, you're trying to pull significance out of, you're trying to pull worth out of. He's sitting there saying, listen, if you have the courage to surrender it to me, listen, I'll give you back so much more than you could ever hope or ever imagine is even possible. And so I want to pray for you tonight. Every head bowed, every eye closed. I want to pray